My name is Ketron. I'm a photographer who recently joined the team at Adobe. I'm on the Lightroom team focused on community, and I'll be your moderator for today. We are talking about photography and social media, and we have for you this incredibly talented panel of photographers, a very diverse set of photographers. So as they introduce themselves, you'll figure out that they kind of work in vastly different photography spaces. But as we all know, being sort of photo-minded folks who are here at Photoville, imagery and the power of imagery is so important today when it comes to getting our messages out there, to getting to conveying, all of the things that we want to convey. So each individual up here is using imagery in a very different way. Their work is different across the board. So what I want to do is really just introduce each of them to you briefly, but then hand the mic over and have them talk to you very briefly about their work. You'll see a couple of images from each of them. And that's just a really nice way for us to set the stage for the conversation, because it's nice to know who it is that you're listening to and why it is that you should listen to them. They've all found success using social media and photography in one way or another, and again, in vastly different ways. So we have on our panel Daniella Zalcman, who is a documentary photographer who splits her time between New York and Paris. And she's also the founder of Women Photograph. So if you've been around Photoville for a while, especially the last couple of years, you've seen that there's really been this powerful movement of really bringing more attention to women out there who are creating incredible imagery, and Daniella's been a powerful force in that movement. We have Alice Gao, who's a New York-based photographer. She does commercial work, primarily in the still life, interior, and travel spaces. And we have Dave Krugman, who's also based here in New York, who just wanted to be described as a creative, but he does some really incredible photography, which you'll see when he introduces himself. So I would love to hand it over to Daniella to get us started with the introductions. And here's the clicker.
Hi, everyone. How's everyone's afternoon going? Good. Oh, you're all caffeinated. Great. No afternoon slump. Perfect. If anyone could bring me caffeine, that would be great. My name is Daniella. I'm a documentary photographer, as Pei mentioned. And my background is really in hard news photography. I wanted to be a journalist since I was 12 or 13. And so that was really sort of my first mission. It was journalism first, and photography became the medium that I fell in love with much later. I started out as a writer, and sort of midway through college, working in my college newspaper, I realized that photography was really how I wanted to tell stories and to work in that space. And so I spent sort of the first 5 years of my career working as a freelancer in New York City, mostly for the New York Daily News and the Wall Street Journal. And after about 5 years of doing that work, of daily assignments, realized that my strength as an individual and as a storyteller is embedding myself really deeply in people's lives, in communities, in stories. And so the cycle, the newspaper cycle of going into an assignment for 2 hours and taking a photo and then exiting was both frustrating and exhausting for me, and it wasn't really the kind of journalism that I wanted to do. So I started shifting to much more long-form work. And this is an image from my longest project to date, which is called Signs of Your Identity. It looks at the history of coerced assimilation, education in indigenous communities in North America. It's really hard to talk about that history in a 5-minute introduction, but basically in Canada and the US, both governments created this network of boarding schools for indigenous children who were forcibly taken from their homes and sent to these schools where they were whitewashed. They were punished if they spoke their own languages or practiced their culture. They were systematically disenfranchised, systematically made to feel like they should not be indigenous. And so I work a lot in collaborative ways. I work with a lot of multiple exposure. And so this was sort of my journey out of newspapers, trying to still be a documentary photographer and come up with maybe alternative ways to think about telling stories visually. I didn't order these correctly, forgive me. This was the beginning of my foray into more long-form photography, and this was just entirely a personal project where I simultaneously was playing for the first time with alternative processes and also playing with social media. So in 2012, I moved from New York to London. It was the first time I lived outside of the United States. It was also the first time where I was really moving into long-form work by myself. And it was also the first time I was really exploring social media's power as a space where we could reach out to an audience directly as journalists, as storytellers. So these are composites combining New York and London. Oops, I'm sorry, these are all mixed up. This is another image from Signs of Your Identity, interviewing survivors of this boarding school system and deciding that the way that I wanted to visually tell the story was to overlay the sights and memories of the boarding school experience with portraits of survivors themselves. Social media for me is also still a pleasure. I really enjoy creating imagery for fun, and I try to make sure that I am doing that regularly so that journalism and storytelling is not just a job, it is also just a practice that I am engaging in on a regular basis. So a lot of the work that goes up on my Instagram account, in addition to being parts of projects that I am very much invested in and embedded in, is also just saying, look, photography is also just a tool for communicating joy and for sharing with people and being able to start conversations in communities. So sometimes it's just, this was an image from a commercial job I did in Indiana with Big Brothers Big Sisters, and an image from Hawaii while I was working on the latest chapter of Signs of Your Identity overlaid. And same here. It's really, social media for me, I think, is an opportunity to think about how we can change the ways in which we interact with our audiences. For, I think, the three of us here, we all have the social media followings that are larger than most mid-size city newspapers at this point. And so that's a privilege, and it's also an opportunity, because it means we have our own built-in audiences where we can actually show people not just the work we're doing, but we can also get in behind the scenes. We can talk about process, we can talk about how we work and what we think about when we work. And so I think for me, that's one of the most important things that I can do on social media. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, I'm super excited to be here, and thank you guys so much for choosing to spend your Sunday afternoon with us. Okay, skipping to the first image. A little bit background, I started pursuing photography as a full-time career a little bit over 8 years ago. I'm mostly self-taught, as probably many of you are. I studied economics and consumer psychology in college. But it definitely was not a passion of mine. So photography always was. And my dad always liked to say, if it's in the manual, it ain't worth knowing. So I really didn't want to do photography by the books. It was very much trial and error, lots of mistakes, and just a lot of learning along the way. I'm definitely still learning now. And it was hard for me to choose 5 images for this because the variety of subjects I shoot is wildly different. And my commercial work is actually quite different from what I choose to show on social media. So we'll see how this little snippet goes. But I did want to share this first image this is taken exactly 8 years ago in September 2011. This was one of my first commissioned editorial jobs for Kinfolk magazine. And it was the first time I got to work with a prop stylist and a food stylist on set, and there was this collaborative effort that had been missing in all of my previous work because I was just doing everything on my own and flying by the seat of my pants. And I really loved this collaborative part of it, and I was like, yes, this is what I really want to do more of. And then back then, I was really into this soft light, very shallow depth of field, didn't really know what I was doing lighting-wise technically. And if we this is a very sensitive clicker. If we fast forward to this still life image, I took this last year for this Paper Flowers book, so that's actually a paper flower. Also worked with a stylist, and I think there's still very much a focus on composition and lighting, but I hope that in that span of time, I've really refined that aesthetic and really learned a lot about shaping light, especially, and recreating the kind of light that is so important to still life images because you never know what you're going to get. You can't rely on the sun. You can't rely on natural light. So that's something I've been working on still. I wanted to include this image from quite a while ago too, and it's from a mobile phone from several iterations of iPhones ago, maybe an iPhone 6 or something. But I really still love it because it brings me back to this like nostalgic south of France summer, which is where this was taken. And it was, to me, I'm always like a proponent of this idea that the best camera is the one you have on you. You don't have to get all fancy with tech specs, and especially when I'm on like a personal travel thing, it's more about capturing like this mood and freezing this memory and moment than worrying about like, oh, do I have to have like the latest fanciest camera. So yeah, that's still a favorite photo of mine. Speaking of capturing like a feeling and moment, this was from a trip in Kenya last spring, and it's hard to go to a safari-esque trip and not come away with epic images, even if you're not a photographer. It just like lends itself to these like incredible landscapes and animal photography. But to me, like this was one that stood out a little bit more to me personally because it feels a little more quiet and subdued. It's like this very intimate moment with this lone elephant who, was just taking his time, even though the rest of the herd was going away from this drinking well. And when I think about when it comes to travel photography, especially going to places that have been so heavily photographed and like there's already beautiful photographic output from these places, it's like extra important to me to come up with like or to really share a unique vision or a unique point of view, because I'm not going to go there to just recreate like all the beautiful images that I've seen. And then I thought it was important to me to include an image where I am physically in the image, because I largely learned photography through self-portraiture. And in the college years, I spent a lot of time with my self-timer because I was the only subject that was always available to myself, no matter what hour of time, because it's college and you're up at 3 a.m. like trying to do photos. There's this typical notion that the person who presses the shutter is the photographer of the image. And I think that's, very much a simplification of it, because there's so much goes into a photo before that shutter is even clicked. In this case, I set up the tripod like across the street. I framed the image, figured out like where I should be positioned in it. I knew I wanted cabs to be in the foreground, and then my assistant pressed the shutter, but I don't think that like he took the photo, and yeah, we just got lucky with this exact moment of cabs, but that's a lot of what travel photography is anyway, luck. So yeah, that's it for me.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Hi guys, my name is Dave Krugman. I'm a photographer mainly, but I do a lot of other types of creative work. I'm really glad to be here with you today. I love this festival every year. It's so amazing to see. I feel like every year there's more people, and that makes sense because I feel like there's always more photographers. If you want to pull out your phone, I won't think it's rude, and you can like look through some more images that I've made. It's just at dave.krugman. Also, my DMs are always open if you guys have further questions and you don't have time to ask. Before I get into my images and the work, I just want to talk a little bit about like what has happened in photography in the past 10 years, and especially I think what's happened with a lot of our work and the directions we've gone. And that has a lot to do with like the fragmentation of traditional media. What happened with social media and through smartphones is like information became kind of democratized, especially in the way that it's distributed. It used to be that in the 90s, if you wanted to be a published photographer, there's a very finite amount of outlets where you could make that possible, and those outlets were finite in themselves. A piece of paper is a piece of paper. Once it's printed and distributed, then that's it. But with your phone, that's an infinitely refreshing space for photography. And that's just your phone. Like even billboards are screens now on the trains. All the train ads are screens. That means that the amount of space and the demand for photography is higher than it's ever been, and it's increasing every single day as each screen is produced. So I say that to say, because I've even heard a lot today from different people like, oh my God, there's too many photographers. The photography market is saturated. And I just think that couldn't be further from the truth. I think we're in a golden age of photography because we can all learn faster. The demand is far outpacing the supply of photography, and just don't be discouraged by how many photographers there are. It's a much more democratic industry now, and I think it's a good thing. So that's just to frame my perspective, and the way that I was able to kind of like find my inroads into the industry and to become a professional photographer. Oops, whoa, you guys are not kidding. Let's see. Okay, cool. So I like to describe my style as kind of like a cyber noir. I am extremely inspired by science fiction. Both, first it started with books. I was, kind of inhaling books when I was a kid, and I always loved like Isaac Asimov and all these things, and that translated into a love for science fiction movies like Blade Runner and name it, I love it, and TV shows and Netflix and all that stuff too. So I love that sense of like futurism, but I also was inspired by like these old kind of images I've seen from what I would call the traditional masters of street photography, right? These kind of like guys in hats and fancy high heels and trench coats and newspapers and stuff like that. So as my focus, no pun intended, narrowed, I kind of gravitated towards this sense of like, finding the past in the future. So that's kind of how I think about the work that I like to create for my personal work, at least. So this image I just thought was like, kind of looks like to me, looks like a still from some old movie, but at the same time, you have these bright lights in the background, like you have these super bright halogen headlights, and the folder that he's carrying, it's not like a briefcase, it's not a traditional thing, it's this plastic folder that is kind of like out of place in this picture, but the color of it kind of works for me. Another thing you might notice about my photography is like I really like shooting in inclement weather, because I think that the way the weather changes the city, it changes the way that people interact with their environment, and that makes moments that are inherently more rare. I'm always looking for these rare moments. So on a beautiful sunny day, like I am less attracted to make images than on these kind of days when there's particulate in the air that can kind of catch the light. I included this image because it's one of those images that I'm really into this idea of like preconceiving things. So, even when I don't have my camera, I'm constantly learning about photography. Like even when these house lights went on, or the house lights went down and the spotlights went on, like, oh, like look at the shift in light, seeing how it changed the audience, right? So that ability to kind of look at different situations and be curious about what's happening in that scene can allow you to be, like you said, like lucky, right? So, because what is luck? I love this expression, and this is not my own, but luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, right? So by studying light and studying the world and the way people move through it and the way light interacts with those subjects, that's your preparation. And then your opportunity will just surround you if you put yourself into these situations. This one in particular, I liked because this is just a black umbrella. And what's happening is there was a line of emergency vehicles going by. This is in the Flatiron District. And basically, I started noticing that when one passed in front of somebody that had a kind of sheer black fabric, the strobe was powerful enough to cast shadows back into that thin surface. If the umbrella is too thick, it doesn't work. If the umbrella is too thin, it's not a shadow. So I was like looking for the perfect combination, and this I liked this moment because it only existed for like that less than a fraction of like a millisecond? Is that smaller than a second? Yeah. It was 1 millisecond where you could see the outline of this guy, and that really creates a story. Otherwise, to me, this is just a photo of an umbrella. And because you see this kind of like mysterious shape, there's a little bit of a story in it, and that's why I included this image in particular. Here's another one that kind of speaks to my love of rain and that kind of like cyber noir vibe I was talking about. It was raining, like you don't really get Times Square like this, especially, this is at like 4 p.m. or something like that. But it was really dark out because the clouds were so thick, and it was raining so hard. I don't know how much you can see on the screen because I can't see it, but if you notice all this texture down here, like it's raining so hard that the ground is like completely textured. And if you look to the left of the guy with the umbrella, there's all these people hiding, right? They're all hiding from the rain because it was this huge sudden downpour. And then there's this one guy walking with 2 umbrellas. One is closed and one is up. And usually this would be a completely crowded scene and there's no image here. But because like the rain created this sense of isolation, and and I'm willing to get very wet. I was able to make this image that has a lot more going for it, like these leading lines with this kind of guy mid-step. So again, knowing that these situations are out there, and that when they come, if you're ready and you're prepared, you can make good images, or what people would call like a decisive moment. So I think I'll leave it at that for now, and I'm happy to get into this discussion.
Great. Yeah, that sounds.
Oh, here's one more. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I think there's actually two.
Are there two more? Okay, wait. I'm
There's
sorry.
five-
False
there's
alarm.
five- There's 5 for you. So. You
Okay,
can
I'll
just-
go.
yeah.
I'll go really quickly. This one I included because it speaks to shutter speed, which is something that, like, when you first start, like, I think people are really interested in clear, crisp images. They're definitely interested, like you say, like in that, like, how wide open can you shoot and get this like beautiful, dreamy background. But like as you do that over and over and over for years, you're like, you get a little curious about the other things that you can do. So this is an example of, if you set your shutter speed to like 1/15 of a second and you pan with the with the subject, this all of a sudden the subject is still and the city is moving. And I don't want to get too deep into this idea, but like of general relativity. But that's how I think about photography. It's time, space, light. It's like the physics of light and how you record it that you can make a good image with. This is another example of that same thing where I didn't add purple to this image. This is a rare foggy day on the Brooklyn Bridge. And what they do is when there's low visibility, they park these little police cars on it. And the police cars are flashing red, blue, red, blue, red, blue. And I was thinking, like, if photography is painting with light, can we mix light? Like, can you mix light like you mix paint? And I think a lot of you might have known that, yes, you can do that. But I was a little naive to that. So I decided that if I could get a flash of red and a flash of blue in the same frame, like in the same exposure, that maybe it would mix and make purple. And it worked out. And so in the moment, I learned something new about photography that I had never learned before, and that's another tool in my repertoire that I can kind of use, whether on a commercial shoot or just walking around the streets and making images. So that's my descriptions.
That's great. Thank you to each of you for sharing a little bit of your stories and sharing your images with us and just talking a little bit about your approach. I think that actually, Dave, you had a nice segue into sort of the next section that I want to get into, which is very specifically about social media, because that's why we're here today, to really talk about social media and photography and how the two intersect and work very, very closely together. So the idea that you mentioned of like social media and the fact, you mentioned it as well, Daniella, the fact that we as creators now have our own platforms and distribution spaces. So photography, not only has been democratized because we all have devices that capture imagery, but we all have these platforms as well, to varying degrees of reach, right, depending on what our following is and whatnot. So I would love to hear from each one of you. Sure, I can grab that. But I would love to hear from each one of you about how social media has impacted your photography. So 15 years ago, for example, we could have, the same individuals with the same talent could have launched into these photography careers. You could have launched into your photography career at a moment where social media was less of a thing. So can you talk a little bit about how social media impacted your work as a photographer, and how successful you feel like you've become? Daniella, you've started your own company. So what might that have looked like had social media not been around? How has it helped you achieve your goals as a photographer?
I think there are two things I want to touch on. And one is that, like Dave said, I think there's a lot of sort of doomsday sounding happening right now in photography, but especially in photojournalism. And yes, there are some very terrifying, complicated, or horrible things happening in the journalism world right now, but journalism is more important than ever. Good journalism is more important than ever. Good photojournalism is crucial to how we see and understand our world, and that will never change. I think what we consider to be the tenets of good photojournalism, that's evolving rapidly, and it should. And so I'm really here for those conversations, and I think a huge part of Photoville is diving into those conversations, and that's wonderful. But part of it is that we now consume more imagery than we ever have before. It's mind-boggling how many images we see every single day. And to speak from the news side of things, when we're dealing with images of trauma, which is a huge amount of what we consume in the news media, how we have to think more critically now that we are bombarded by possibly hundreds, if not thousands, of images of war, famine, natural disasters, any of it on a daily basis. We have to think about how that impacts our audience and whether it's having the same impact it did in, say, the 1970s when Nick Ut's Napalm Girl ran on the front page of newspapers. Are we still having that searing kind of critical impact with a single image? And if not, what do we have to do to change our practice? And so that, for me, that was part of the reason why I started working in composites with that boarding school story, was because my first straight documentary work on that project was actually looking at a public health statistic, which was HIV prevalence rates in First Nations communities in Canada, which is primarily spread through injection drug use. And so it was my first time working in Indigenous communities. It was my first time working in communities where injection drug use was prevalent. Like, there were so many different learning curves. I did not get it right the first time, and so I can go off on a second tangent about slow journalism. But that was the point where I realized the images that I made on the very first trip on that project, they were not good. They were no longer, to me, the concept of good journalism. They were no longer going to further my audience's understanding of the story, of the history of the issues, and so I needed to come up with a new visual language. Then I had a second point, but I think I just rambled for a bit, so I'll cool it for now.
I think for me, it largely goes back to like having your own platform. Like, even if no one else will publish you, well, you're like, well, I've got this thing, so I can do that. I mean, I was on Flickr like in 2005 or something, and that's where I wasn't using it just to like host my images. I was using it as like a daily photography practice, and I would find like one image per day to like post, and really kind of grew from there. And then when I moved to New York, I started a blog just to chronicle, daily New York goings and abouts, and I really liked food, so it was like photographing a lot of that. So I think that really helped me gain a bit of confidence in my work, because when I was trying to, start photography full time, I was trying to go the more traditional route, where it's like you find photographers you admire and you ask to be their assistants, or you work within their studio. But that's actually quite difficult when you don't have any experience as an assistant. And now I totally understand I understand why I was rejected so much, because when I get emails from kids who are like, oh, I have zero experience, but I really want to learn from you on set. And I'm like, I don't have time for that on set. Like, I really need an experienced assistant who knows exactly how to navigate a set. And because I couldn't get that experience assisting, I was like, well, I'm just gonna shoot my own personal projects and post them to this blog, and then Instagram started shortly after, and I was on that almost immediately. So that, and then just eventually sharing more stories. I think I ended up getting that kinfolk job that I posted about through my blog. So, it worked. The other thing I did want to say is I think social media has impacted me in that, photography can be a very selfish thing. It's if you don't share it, it's just like, ooh, I took this thing, and it can be soul satisfying and selfish. But because I'm sharing it, and I feel more accountable in a way of what I put out there. And sometimes I get these notes, or when people meet me in person, they're like, oh, you've really inspired me, or you've inspired me to quit my job and try to do this thing. And I'm like, yikes. But I feel very accountable, and it pushes me to, continue to either try to inspire, or I never want to stay stagnant in where I am, because I'm like, shit, people are being inspired by this, and I don't want to disappoint them. So that's part of it.
Wow, great. I completely agree with both things that you guys have said, all of it. I wanted to just further kind of piggyback off your idea about the selfishness of photography. The word I always think of when I think about the way photography used to be, at least when I started, was it felt very solitary too. And I think one of my favorite parts about what social media has done to the industry and to the community is that it's made it a lot more tangible and closer. This medium is a two-way street. If you pick up a magazine, and you want to communicate as a viewer back to the artist, you're gonna write a letter. Are you gonna take that effort? Are you gonna go out and seek out that person? It's a lot harder. That barrier is a lot thicker. On social media, like I said earlier, like if you send me a message, I will get back to you. And like, when did we have that opportunity before? Some of my best friends. I mean, I've known you for like 5 years now.
Empty met days.
Yeah, exactly. And all through this little app on our phones that can seem like this little insignificant thing, but and you as well. It's like we met through this. So I think the number one thing I like about what social media has done is has made, I think, the creative community, and not just photographers, like painters, illustrators, everybody, a little more tight-knit. And I also think the second thing I love about it is almost a result of that first thing, which is that I don't feel a sense of any cutthroat competition like I used to, in the sense that like another person's success is my loss. I don't feel that way because we're not all competing to get the attention of the same gatekeepers. Like, we're our own gatekeepers now. And something that you said earlier in your introduction I thought was so true, which is about like, I think it was like something about the ability to have your enough distribution that you're like, you compete with like a small newspaper, right?
Mid-sized.
Yeah, mid-size. So yeah, she's right. Like, the reach that some people are getting on social media is the same reach that you would get with a full staff, an office, distribution, printing, lawyers, legal teams, everything, except it's just you. And yeah, that's a lot of work and it's a lot of pressure, and I'm sure we've all experienced social media burnout and stuff like that. But that means that all of those resources are yours to use and to play with. And like, that means that like, you have a lot less overhead as an artist, which makes art a lot easier to create. So I think that's, I don't know if that's really directly addressing the question of like how has things changed, but that's the things that I love about it most.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea that you brought up of social media really helping to build community, because for a lot of photographers, it can be very isolating to be a creator out there in the world, because most of the time when you're working by yourself. Maybe you're on a set with a few other people, but I know a lot of what you do, you're just like out in the middle of nowhere by yourself with like all your cameras and your gear, trying to make it work. So it can be very isolating. The idea of social media helping to build community is a really powerful one, and I think that we're all the better for it. And things like this wouldn't exist without social media as well.
Do you mind if I add one thing?
No, not at all.
I think the other thing that, again, from a sort of more journalistic news background, that's very powerful to me about social media is the added accountability. And I can speak specifically to sort of the first long-form work I did was in East Africa, somewhat by accident, looking at the rise of homophobia in Uganda, and it was sort of where I started focusing my work on the legacy of Western imperialism and how colonization and the laws that were left behind dramatically shaped social, political, economic structures. But when I first started working in Uganda in 2011, it was very disconnected from Western media. And so for some good and bad reasons, I could say to people I was talking to who were potentially deeply at risk legally and socially for coming out as gay, I could say to them, look, I am working for New York-based outlets. It will run in this capacity, in these spaces. And if they felt that was safe, if they knew that their neighbors and their parents and their friends weren't going to see those images, then it was okay. And it was this total separation. And then I came back once the anti-gay law was passed by Ugandan parliament in late 2013, and all of a sudden, everyone had a smartphone and everyone was on Facebook and Twitter. And my relationship, not just to the people I was photographing, but to the images of them and how people around them could see them, completely changed. And it was a lot more complicated to navigate, and it was a lot more scary because the consequences felt very real and very looming, but it also, I appreciated that I was now Facebook friends with all of these people, and so anyone could reach out to me and be like, hey, I saw that story, I didn't like it. And I think that's important for journalism, because for a long time it felt like we were all just parachuting into different spots of the world and doing our work and going home and publishing, and that was kind of the end of the conversation. And it's a continuous relationship, and I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I was going to say for myself as a photographer, given my own background, is that, 15 years ago when I started taking photographs, the only clientele that I had access to were the people who were physically around me. So that was very limiting in terms of me being a photographer and being able to do the types of jobs that I wanted to do. I did a lot of weddings and portrait sessions, and I didn't feel super passionate about that. And I know that a lot of photographers kind of start with that same background. So when social media first became a thing, suddenly I started having access to clients that were around the world that would hire me for jobs that I really wanted to do, like more travel-based jobs, more commercial jobs that would get me out of my physical home location and get me to this new space. And without social media, that just wouldn't have been possible before.
I love that too. And what you said about clientele, I think is really important. Because I talked a little bit earlier about the demand for content is just higher than it's ever been, which is a good thing for any visual creative. That's a good thing. And I was just thinking in my head, I was like, are there more clients than ever before? And it's like, absolutely. Like almost everyone is a potential client now because, you know, whether you need a headshot, whether you have like an ice cream truck you want images for, or like you want your birthday party photographed, because we communicate visually now more than ever. And I think what's so beautiful about that is that like you don't need to translate images. Like it's kind of this, you know, I can look at street photography from Japan and I understand exactly what they're trying, you know, to go for. And then I was thinking the one level even further is like there's probably like 50,000 dogs who are potential clients because they have huge Instagram accounts. So it's like crazy. It's not even just limited to people anymore. Like so just please be encouraged if you're into this stuff, like lean in.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Absolutely. And so my next question for you guys is, given the fact that there is such a variety of images that can be taken, and you know, Alice, you even mentioned that it can be such a selfish act on some levels, just like what you as a photographer decide what to create and what to capture. How do you decide what goes on social media and what doesn't? Like what resonates with your audience, or how do you decide what resonates with your audience?
I think for me, the thing that I love about Instagram low-key ripping off Snapchat is that it gave me multiple spaces in which to communicate. So, you know, my feed is intensely curated, and it's the work that I want photo editors to see when they land on my profile if they've never seen my work before. So that pressure gets a little overwhelming, and so, you know, I maybe post twice a month, and that's as often as you'll see those images there, but I'm constantly posting to stories, and especially when I'm on the road working on projects, it's how I communicate with both people who I want to hire me and to just the general public. And so it's very much in my own voice, it's very behind the scenes, it's, here, let me take you along with me, and I'm figuring this out for myself, and I'm gonna tell you my thought process, I'm gonna share what I'm discovering as I go, and it's just kind of a voyage. But you know, I hate this word, we talk about it a lot in social media with authenticity, I think is, you know, such a weird buzzword right now, but it is truly authentic. It is me being earnest and honest with who I am as a photographer, as a storyteller, with my process, and I think that's important too. I think feeling like you have that connection to visual storytellers, to photographers, especially to journalists who we have a debatably trusting relationship in this country right now, I think that's super important.
Yeah, I love the fact that now with Instagram stories, we get to see so much more behind the scenes stuff. So we're learning a lot from not only the successes of the people that we're following, but their failures as well. I was just thinking of one example I think you had posted in the last couple months where you had traveled to this very remote location and you flew in a helicopter or something like that, and you were like, oh, my destination, like when I got there it was closed or it was too late or the people were gone, so I missed it, and I guess I'm gonna just be here for the night and I'll try again tomorrow. You know, you don't necessarily see all of that on the polished feed, so it's great to see those behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think I have a similar in that the stories is definitely where I put most content nowadays, and then I still think of my actual feed as more of a highlight reel. It's definitely not real. It's like beautiful moments I found. It could be simple, like still lifes at home. I do a lot of that. I'm really into design and architecture, so I love sharing like places I've visited around the world that are architecturally significant, because that's just an actual passion of mine. So I'm like, cool, I can like share this, and hopefully someone will learn something new from that. But yeah, I think the stories is really where the fun parts happen. So you get the good and the bad on stories, and yeah, because I don't want to make the feed like this, you know, complainy thing or anything negative, or I keep it very short and simple there because that's just it makes me happy to see images that I personally like on there. So I don't know, it's my answer is kind of simple.
You restate the question?
Yeah, so the initial question was, how do you decide what to share on social media?
Oh, okay, cool. The first thing that pops into my head that I would say is like, try not to don't let an algorithm hijack your creative voice. Like, don't chase numbers around. Like, don't think that because an image has a lot of likes, it's a good image. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. Because you don't know what's going on with the algorithm or what they're changing or what they're tweaking or, we have no power over that. So like, don't attach your emotions to something that you have absolutely no power over. So when I just try not to I want to make images that my audience likes, but I want to make images that I like even more. And if I get 10,000 likes on one photo and I get 1,000 likes on another, and I let that affect the direction of my work, that's how you get to the most bland, average, what I would call pop photography. I think this is the first era where something exists like pop photography. For me, I like music that is kind of on the fringes of things, on the creativity, not necessarily the top 20 songs that are playing on the radio, because I think that's kind of the average of everybody's tastes. So I just, when I think about what to post, I try to say, I do want to have some sort of cohesion to my feed, oh, this is what people expect from me. So I want to stick to some sort of nebulous idea of what like I said before, cyber noir or whatever you want to call it. But I also want to make sure that I'm not, limited by that and contained by my own set of rules, because these platforms are psychologically designed to keep you addicted. It's classic Pavlovian conditioning. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book, which is you have an output, you get a reward, and then you get a dopamine response. So just know that they have the best psychologists in the world, the highest paid psychologists in the world work for Facebook. So just try to fight. It's really hard. I fall victim to it too. It does affect my emotions sometimes, but really, be careful not to fall into to those feedback loops, because it's a dangerous thing, especially for creativity.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think that for any creator out there, we have, whether we like to admit it or not, fallen into this trap of, well, when I posted this last time, it did really well, so maybe I should do more of that. And it is a really dangerous sort of spiral to fall into, and that's kind of where we see, up and coming photographers they're trying to emulate the photographers around them who are successful, which I think is absolutely valid and a great thing to do, and a really positive way of learning. But what then we end up seeing is that all of these images across social media start looking the same, because there's a formula for what works well and what resonates and what gets all the likes and engagement on social media, and that is not always to the benefit of each individual photography or the world of photography in general.
Yeah. One last thing to just cap off my thought is it takes one person to change your life and change your career. You can get an opportunity that will change your entire creative life. It's going to be probably one person making that decision. So if you have 100 followers, you're that's 100 people. If you have 1,000 followers, yeah, you have there's a slightly higher chance that one of those people can hire you for that gig that's going to be a breakthrough for you. So it's valuable to have people following you, but if you have 1 million 13-year-olds following you, they're not going to hire you. So that is way less valuable than 20 photo editors. So don't, again, just to say, don't get caught up in the numbers. Don't see oh, they have 100,000 followers, I'll never get there. It's just, that's not what it's about. It's about how can you curate your network in a way that can help advance the things that you want to put out and create in the world. So.
Can I add one quick thing? Because in the beginning I'd mentioned that my commercial photography is actually very different from what I share on social media. And the part of the reason is because a lot of those images are they're highly retouched, they're very stylized, they, are glossy, beauty still life images where everything is super perfect. And I don't think that fits the aesthetic of what I'm trying to share on social media per se. And also I've always, I think you should share images that you want to shoot more of. So I always try to think about that too when I'm posting.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So one of the things that I wanted to also ask you guys is because I know from following each of you for years now that you spend a good amount of your time on the road. I was curious to know sort of what the role of smartphone photography has played in your process over the years. Are you shooting with your phone? Are you editing with your phone? Like, how does it factor into what you share on social media?
It's gotten to the point that my primary project, the Signs of Your Identity at the boarding school history, that's entirely shot and edited on iPhones, smartphones. Shouldn't give Apple any props when they don't need it. And I'm at a point where I either am shooting medium format film or I'm using a smartphone. I feel very allergic to my DSLR unless I have to use it for assignment work. I will bring it out, but otherwise I know I am a much smarter, more thoughtful, slower photographer when I either have film or I have something that's just a little less intimidating, because I think we all recognize when we bring out a loud, clunky SLR, people, in this day and age, they freeze up just a little. It becomes, especially when, it's one thing when you're on set and you're working with professionals who are used to posing, who are used to being photographed, but average people who I photograph mostly, we're in a complicated relationship right now with photography, with the media, with journalists. And so, if I can be more low-key, if I can be more universal in the way I use photography, and for me, the smartphone works wonders. So I really love using smartphone photography for journalism.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely love my phone for personal travel. If I could, I would just not leave. I would, and actually sometimes I do. If it's purely just for personal, I don't bring any other cameras, or I'll bring a film camera so that I don't have to worry about looking through the images or trying to edit those film images until I'm back home. I think I used to be much more of an in the moment publisher of photos when I'm traveling, and I've started to move away from that because I like to leave a place and then kind of look through all the images I've taken and then really be able to select the best narrative for that, instead of just being every day blah blah blah, here are the my favorite 3 images from the day. So it just it takes the pressure off of having to do that on the day while I'm trying to enjoy my travels, and then later I can be much more thoughtful and considered about which images I think best represent the experience I want to show.
I love this question because I think it's an important one. I think there's kind of this tendency when people first get into photography, gear is fun. It's cool. The technology that we have these days is amazing. So you go into a B&H or Adorama or whatever, and you're like, oh my God, look at all this stuff. If I can just get $5,000, I can be a professional photographer. It's no, there's no correlation between how much you're spending and what type of, besides the size of the image and maybe what lenses you can use and stuff like that. But the devices, who in here has a camera phone? It's everybody, right? Almost everybody. So you have a tool that you can use to start developing your craft. And I used to get so many DMs every single day. The number one question still that I get on social media is, hey, I've saved $1,000. What camera can I buy? I'm thinking this one or that one or that, and I always just say just start with how you see the world and what you want to capture, and just make it with your phone. You're talking to me on the thing you need. And it was happening so much that I was like, you know what? I need to prove this to people somehow. So to plug myself again one more time, I have a second account called Secret Street. And I started it 5 years ago, and I was like, I'm going to make an account. I'm going to build up a following on an account. And I'm never going to use any paid apps. I'm never going to use anything but an iPhone or phone or whatever. I agree. I know Apple's struggling right now, but I don't want to give them any free press. So I started that account, and whenever somebody would ask me, oh, hey, I'm going to spend all my money on a camera, what should I buy? I was like, go check out this account. It's called Secret Street. And I didn't have my name on it at first. It was just kind of this feed that I would try to post 1 photo a day, just as a daily journal, as a sketchbook, as a practice for me. I said, do you like those images? They say, oh, yeah, that reminds me of your stuff. I really like that stuff. And then they'd follow. And then it wasn't until then that I'd reveal, I'd say, okay, well, I shot all of that on just my smartphone. And I just edited it with 1 free app. So, and now the mobile Lightroom is so powerful. I was using selective editing and healing brushes, and that's all in the palm of your hand. So it's a huge part of my process. And it's let's say that my phone account is just my little daily sketchbook, and then my main account is like my professional mirrorless work that I shoot on much higher quality for like prints and stuff like that. But why not? You have the camera on you. If you see something, like just practice. It's fun. It's amazing.
I should add that all the 5 photos that I shared, those are all shot and edited with my smartphone.
Yeah, that's great to know. I mean, smartphone cameras have just gotten better and better and better, and I think a lot of photographers, professional photographers I know, feel much better now about leaving the house without a big clunky camera with them. It's like you can do so much with just your phone, and especially when it ties so closely to social media, it's just an easy, like, you already shot it on your phone, you can just share it right away from there. And for me, one of the things that I loved most about getting into smartphone photography was that when smartphones and Instagram first became a thing, I had already been a photographer for over 10 years. I knew shutter speed, aperture, I knew all of the technical elements of shooting fully manual and everything. And the nice thing about shooting on my phone was that I didn't have to worry about any of that. I could focus on composition, the moment, and telling the story that I wanted to tell. So I think that was hugely powerful. I get that same question, what camera do you use? Or like, can you recommend something for me? I'm like, just get a good smartphone camera, and that's a fantastic place to start. So I know we're running a little bit short on time, so instead of going further into questions on the panel, I'd love to open it up to this. We have like about 10 minutes left to do a Q&A session, so if you guys have any questions you'd love to ask. First hand I saw was in the back there.
So talking about social media versus your own website development, I mean, social media is really sort of taken over. Professionally, how much do you see social media taking over the efforts you put into your own personal websites?
I love this question because I wanted to ask it as well, but I didn't want to waylay the conversation as we were having it. So thank you. So the question, for those of you who weren't able to hear it, is sort of, can you talk about social media as it relates to your like personal, professional website? What role do the two play? How do they play together? How do they work separately?
I haven't updated my website in 3 years. And I'm not proud of it, and I need to be better, but it's totally taken over. And my website is fine and represents my most important project, so it's not an urgent thing I need to address. But I know that a lot of people who are looking to see if they want to maybe work with me go to my Instagram account. So as long as it's not a horrible travesty, it's not at the forefront of my mind, whereas thinking about what latest thing for my latest project can I share on Instagram, that to me seems more urgent.
Yeah, same. I mean, I try to update my website portfolio just to at least share some projects that I'm excited about that have come out. But honestly, sometimes clients will come to me and they're like, they only know of my the stuff on my Instagram, and I'm like, that's not even really my that's not like my work. That's kind of just a daily journal kind of thing. So yeah, it doesn't seem like they care that much. Or they'll be like, can you share some like examples of what you like this beauty still life, because we're a beauty company and we want to see. And I'm like, yeah, it's on my website. So clearly they haven't even seen it.
Yeah, I mean, same. I mean, here's what I think about it, and it goes back to something you said earlier, which I loved, which is there's the stories, which are super casual and oh, whatever, this is funny, or this is cool, or this is behind the curtain a little bit. Then there's your Instagram feed, which is oh, I'm a little more refined here, and I know this is going to exist, in relative perpetuity. And then the website is even further. It's well, every few months I'll go back in and update with my favorite projects and stuff like that. But my biggest contracts I've ever got are just people hitting me up on Instagram in my DMs. Because if you think about what Instagram is it's like handing out a flyer. If you have 50,000 followers, you're handing out a flyer to 50,000 people a day. I'm way more interested in focusing on that than the chance that somebody's going to Google New York City street photographer, maybe, and then stumble across my website and then try to find my email address. The quicker, the less steps you can get for her client to be able to communicate with you, that adds up. Those percentages add up like crazy. So if you're trying to get into this, definitely focus on the social media aspect of things. And if you can afford the time and the money to have a website, then you can lean into that. But yeah, definitely social media is a far bigger effort for me than my website. Yeah.
Certainly the first place that most clients tend to look. Next question. In the back.
Okay, so I'm a wedding and portrait photographer. I wanted to jump on trying to find clients through my Instagram account. A number of you have mentioned that. I booked like a couple of small jobs, but for the most part, the people who follow me are either previous clients or other photographers. So how do I get potential clients to follow me? How do I get, decision makers to follow me? Do I follow them so they follow me back? I'm not exactly.
I think the biggest key and umbrella comment I would make is be engaged on the platform. So like you can't just post and be like, well, nobody, nobody. I'm not saying you're doing this, but in general, like you can't just throw something out there and walk away. Like try to hold yourself to like post maybe like 3 times a week, or I try to post every day. I haven't posted in a week, so it just shows you how good I'm doing. But I said this earlier to somebody, like every time you post, that's like dropping a fishing line in the water, right? And if you're not dropping those lines in the water, you're not going to catch anything. You're not even in the boat. So on social media, like look up top wedding photographers on social media. Go look in their comments, like see who's following them, like engage with those people in a real, like organic, authentic way. Like it's not spammy, it's not corny. Like you can really engage with people, like make friends through these platforms, and like I'm sure there's tons. I'm not a wedding photographer, so I don't know, but I guarantee there's like wedding photography hubs where they're featuring other wedding photographers and stuff like that. So follow them, see what other people are doing, just study how they're using social media, and then leave comments so people see your name, and then leave compelling, thoughtful comments so people are like, oh, who's this guy? That's an interesting thing. And then they go to your page, and then they'll follow you. And like if you keep having this presence, you keep dropping those lines in the water, like that's how you're going to catch those fish. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. If I know that we're recording this, so if you weren't able to hear the question, it was really about like how do I connect with clients, in particular for weddings and portraiture and stuff like that. But how, as somebody who's using social media, do I basically grow a following so that I can reach the right people who might want to hire me? And Dave had a great answer, and I always like to say, keep social media social. So along those same lines. Just social media isn't meant to be used as a megaphone where you just broadcast and don't consume and interact as well. So if you want to grow that following, you have to be putting in you have to be doing much more than just sharing content. You have to be spending time, you have to be building those relationships, and that's how you build clientele. One last question maybe on this side? Yeah.
How do you feel about directly messaging clients? Say you have a project in mind that maybe correlates with something that they do. Do you guys ever reach out directly?
So the question is, how do you feel about reaching out to potential clients? So if you have a project in mind that might be cool for a client, how do you feel? Do you reach out to them? Do you like cold email, cold DM somebody saying, and like basically pitch them what you do? Like how often do you guys do that?
I kind of rarely do that. I would say that if I don't think there's anything wrong with it, I think it's very proactive and very good. I would just say that there's a couple things to make sure you're not doing. Don't just like copy paste something and try to like spam everybody with it. Like people can tell immediately that you're not being authentic. Like if you have a specific idea for a specific person, like write a personal note to them. Not like you don't have to like put it in the mail, but like slide into their DMs, as they say. And also don't like I get a lot of people that approach me that are like say a model will DM me and be like, hey, I really want to shoot with you. Like, do you have time? And I'm like, well, yeah. What are you thinking? And they're like, well, here's my rates. I'm like, excuse me. Like, so don't bait and switch people either. Like, if you're gonna pitch somebody you really want to work with, and they do have budget, like, just be respectful in how you approach people, because you're expecting them to take their time out of their day to communicate with you, and just So that's my advice.
Yeah, I mean, I cold email photo editors all the time because that is a routine part of photojournalism, but maybe this is me being an old cranky lady. I would never DM a photo editor on Instagram and be like, hey, can you hire me to do this thing? That doesn't seem like the right space to me. So I would say find what you think is the appropriate medium, but maybe not DM. I got a WhatsApp message from some kid in England yesterday who was just like, hey, could I call you and talk to you about photography? And it was just like, I answer all of my emails from young photo students. I am super enthusiastic, and a lot of people helped me out when I was young, so I want to pay it forward in that same way. But maybe don't send me a text at 2 in the morning. That feels weird. So, find the right spaces for things.
Yeah, I think I rarely cold email people as well, because every time I did it a lot when I was starting out, because obviously I was like, ooh, here's a brand I really want to work with, or here's a photographer I want to assist or whatever. But rarely did it work out for me. I mean, like most people responded and was just like, yeah, cool, thanks so much for your message. We'll definitely keep you in mind. And I'm like, I know what that means because I send that out now, you know? So, but yeah, I also am not super comfortable DMing people. I try to find a proper contact so that I can, you know, create a little more thoughtful of an email.
Yeah, those are actually really great answers, and it's nice that they're fairly well aligned with one another. So I think that the takeaway for me, at least, hearing these responses is, yeah, social media is great. DMs are great. It's a great way to sort of build relationships, but if you're trying to make a professional pitch, it may not be the right channel. So find a more professional channel, maybe via email or something else.
I mean, sometimes I will DM them to be like, hey, is there an email address
Yeah.
I can, you know,
Yep.
that's where like the cold bit comes in, but it still goes to email.
They're
And
called-
also, a lot of people on their Instagram profiles have that button that says email.
Email,
Like
yeah.
most
Yeah.
people who are professional in the photojournalism in the photography community have that, so you don't have to just DM them.
Yeah.
And I think we are out of time. I know, I'm sorry that there are other questions, but you know, we can always maybe meet outside, and if you have questions, you can catch us on the way out. So thank you guys so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.